Welcome to Behind the Smile with Ash Butterss, a podcast designed to reveal the truth behind the masks we wear. Together, we look to demystify the human mind and its behaviours in relation to mental health, trauma and addiction. My name's Ash and I'll be your host as we uncover the real stories of people's pain and the steps they've taken to live a life of freedom in recovery. From sobriety to spirituality, join me each week as we uncover the reasons why people seek recovery and how their lives have changed by living one day at a time.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Behind the Smile. Today's guest is Jeremy Lipkowitz. Jeremy is a meditation teacher, coach, and porn addiction recovery expert on a mission to empower men to reclaim their minds, thrive in relationships, and live with integrity. Featured in places like Men's Health magazine and Live Strong, his impactful work includes helping men overcome porn addiction and live with greater purpose. Having triumphed over addiction himself through mindfulness meditation, he's shared techniques globally, including at universities, recovery centers, and organizations such as Microsoft and the United Nations. Trained as a Buddhist monk in Myanmar and as an ICF certified executive coach, Jeremy blends science, spirituality, and self-compassion for self-mastery and high-performance living. So dialing in from Cape Town in South Africa, I'd love to welcome Jeremy onto the show. Jeremy, welcome to Behind the Smile. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Ash. I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. Now, before we go any further, we have to say with our audience, we had this interview scheduled for before Christmas time. And then I got this amazing email from you saying, hey, Ash, is it okay if we reschedule? I'm about to head into a 10-day silent meditation retreat. Oh my goodness, you have to tell me, what was that experience like?
Yeah, so it was actually my 18th time doing a silent meditation retreat like this. So at this point, they're not kind of like mind-blowing for me.
Not
the
a
first
big deal
one I
at
did
all.
was there's still a big deal. I mean, it's still a very intense experience. It's still very challenging. So to give your listeners a little bit of understanding what I'm talking about, it's a 10-day silent meditation retreat. So there's no talking, there's no reading, there's no writing. You're not journaling. You have no electronics. You're not supposed to make eye contact with the other participants or communicate in any form. And so it's really 10 straight days of doing nothing but meditation and having no distraction. No talking, no reading, no writing, nothing. And you're practicing a very particular technique of meditation called Vipassana. In the West, we call it insight meditation. But it's a very secular approach to meditation. It's really just paying attention to what you're experiencing in your body, in the environment around you. And they are some of the most challenging things I've ever done, but also some of the most rewarding, because you really have no escape from what you're experiencing. You know, a lot of people think that the hard part of these retreats is not talking. But in fact, not only is that one of the easiest parts, you actually come to enjoy the not speaking aspect. It's like, oh, I can finally have a few days where I don't have to talk to anyone. I don't have to answer any emails or worry about what I'm going to say in this conversation. You really just get to be by yourself. The hard part is not having any distraction from the craziness that's going on in your mind. All the shit that goes on in your head, the regrets, the anxieties, the frustrations, the conversations in the past, the times you messed up. But you get to practice this really beautiful technique that's in many ways healing your mind. And for me is so related to addiction recovery, this practice of Vipassana. We can get into what Vipassana is if you want. But in many ways, it's about unhooking yourself from craving and aversion, from, running towards pleasure or running away from pain, and just learning how to be with what's going on.
It just sounds fascinating. I had no idea that you weren't allowed to read or journal. For some reason, when I assume silent meditation retreat, I just think no talking, like you said. It absolutely blows my mind that there was no writing or no reading either. Talk about having to sit in the shit and feel your emotions. Wow. As somebody who I know absolutely, I've become so cognizant in my sobriety that I used alcohol as a way to distract from my uncomfortable feelings. And now these days, I talk about it a lot on the podcast. I use other things. So for me, the number one go to these days is actually work. And I probably
Hmm.
have swapped my alcoholism for a bit of workaholism, which, there's an awareness around it, but I certainly see myself doing it. What are some of the things that you find yourself going to instead of using porn or any other vices?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought this up because a lot of times, when I bring up porn addiction or someone talks about alcohol addiction, and we tend to think it's these very compartmentalized addictions. But when you really start to understand the way addiction works, you realize, we're all addicts. Every single one of us is using some substance or behavior to escape our pain and to run away and to numb out. And we can break free from our original addiction, and oftentimes we move in healthier directions. Like being a workaholic is most likely a healthier addiction than being an alcoholic, right? For me, sugar is still a huge one that I'm working through. Like food is a huge source of kind of emotional coping and self-soothing. And so for me, food is one. Validation is one. External validation, wanting to be liked by everyone, wanting to get approval. There's so many ways that I still kind of escape and numb out and try to control my experience. And just going back to this, just to say one thing, that's to me one of the real beauties of these retreats is it's you're not allowed to work, you're not allowed to watch Netflix, your food is very controlled, like you don't get to choose, there's 2 meals a day, there's no snacking. It's You really have to sit with your shit and learn how to be with the discomfort of boredom, the discomfort of restlessness, the discomfort of all the different discomforts that we tend to run away from. So it's such a great way to look at the way we're addicts.
And in that 10-day period of time, tell me, I'm going to imagine that the intensity is almost like a wave. For those that are watching, you'll see my hand doing this wave motion at the moment, where I can only assume, so I'd love you to clarify for me, is the hardest part sort of towards the middle of the 10 days? Or like, how does it go? I've got to get my head around it.
It can be anything,
Yeah.
sometimes. So again, I've done this now 18 times. um, Sometimes the hardest part is in the very beginning. It's just like an abrupt change from your day-to-day life to go from 100 miles an hour to zero. Sometimes the hardest part is in the middle, sometimes the hardest part is at the end. There's no way of knowing when the hard part is going to come at any moment. I remember being on a retreat, it was another 10-day retreat, and the first 9 days were just smooth sailing. I had done already a dozen or so, and I was just doing so great the first 9 days. And then the day before we were about to leave was the hardest day. It just hit me like a brick. And so you just never know. And that's part of these retreats, is also getting in touch with kind of the uncertainty of life, the impermanence of, anything can happen at any moment and everything is always changing. And to not get attached to thinking the way things are going to be.
And so tell me, what are the benefits? There must be a pot of gold at the end of this experience for you to put yourself through it 18 times. What do
Yeah.
you experience after this?
Gosh, there's so many benefits. It's hard to nail it down to like, okay, this is the main benefit. I guess I'll just kind of start saying what's on my head. One is just you get a detox from your life. Just a time to break away from your devices. Especially with me, my history with porn addiction, digital addiction is still something that's there. Also, Instagram, my email. And we are so connected to our devices that having 10 or 11 days to disconnect and reset is so beautiful. You get a new perspective on where you are in life, what's important to you. That's part of the benefit also. It's just that perspective of saying, okay, can I see things a bit more clearly? Um, Another one is just, at this point, a friend was asking me, like, why do I keep going on them? And in some ways, it's like general upkeep. It helps me realign and make sure that I'm on the right track. Um, if I've gotten off track, can I get back on, the path that's important to me? And then it's just doing the work. Part of this practice is like strengthening these muscles. One of the important ones we strengthen on these retreats is equanimity. And equanimity is this ability to be with what's difficult without running away from it, or conversely, to be with what's pleasant without grasping after it. Because a lot of times when we're in the context of something that feels good, we kind of say, "Oh, I want more of that.
Want
I want
more
this
of
to
it,
stay."
absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm.
And that's the addict mind, and so learning how to be with both of those experiences, to be with what's pleasant without chasing after it, and how to be with what's unpleasant without running away from it, is a mental trait that you can grow. It's a quality that you can strengthen through meditation training. And so part of it is just like, okay, can I keep strengthening this muscle?
Mm. And how similar is that then to aparigraha, that this idea of non-attachment?
I'm not familiar with a parigraha. Is that like a...
Yeah, so it's one of the yoga yamas and niyamas in Patanjali's
Okay.
Yoga Sutras. It reminds me a lot of what you were just sharing then, this idea that you want to wear life like a loose garment and not be too attached to anything, and to understand that everything in life is impermanent. And when we embody life from this place, life is seemingly in more of a state of flow, because you're not trying to hold on, or like I really relate to before getting sober, having to control every area of my life. And now, I mean, gosh, I can still fall into that habit. But when I'm able to step back and almost like observe and be a witness to the experience rather than feeling like I'm entrenched in the experience, like it's so much more freeing.
Yeah. It sounds like it's the exact same thing. One of the key pivotal moments in my life was realizing what suffering is and where my suffering was coming from. And what suffering is that state of attachment, of wanting things to be a certain way. So either wanting things that you don't have, or something that you enjoy and you want it to stay that way forever. Or conversely, there's something you do have and you don't want it and you're pushing it away. And so this practice of non-attachment, of saying, okay, like, that's where my suffering is coming from, and if I can learn how to be more at peace with the way things are, I can reduce my mental suffering. So it sounds very similar. I think one caveat, or kind of, it's not a caveat, it's more of a nuanced understanding, is sometimes people can take non-attachment or detachment too far, or misinterpret it. And you see these kind of uber spiritual people who are just like, it's all okay, nothing matters, like it's all impermanent, or just be detached. And it's like, we have to have a balanced approach. Like, if we have a family to take care of, if we have a job, we need to make money, we need to care for our bodies and say, hey, this is important to me. And so just having a little bit of a balanced approach and saying, yeah, okay, there's things I care about and things that I want to take care of, but having a healthier, more balanced approach to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Oh my goodness, we've gotten straight into it. I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I want the audience to get to know you, Jeremy. So before we go any further, I'm going to ask you some super simple questions to allow our audience to get to know who you are. Now, you live a really exciting, interesting life. So I would love to know, firstly, where were you born and where do you live now?
I was born in Daly City, California, just near San Francisco, but I grew up more in Santa Cruz. So my parents got divorced when I was 3, and I mostly moved with my mom, who was going to school at the time. So kind of Santa Cruz, the Bay Area is where I'm from. Right now, where I live is a complicated question. I hate the term digital nomad, because I just, I don't want to be nomadic. Like, I like to actually spend like 6 months here or 6 months there, but I have quite a few different places that I spend time. So Bali is one of them, Amsterdam, right now Cape Town. I'm very fortunate and blessed to have a life where I have the freedom to travel and go different places.
Mm. And what is it about travel and, rather than setting your roots, say, in your hometown where you grew up in California, what is it that makes you want to see the world and expand?
Yeah, well, the thing is, I actually want to set roots, and so this is kind of a big thing that I'm working on. Is I want to find my place where I can set roots. I just haven't really found the right place yet. And for me, a lot of it's around community, finding a place where I can be active. There's a few things that I'm looking for, and I'm still trying to find that right place. And maybe my life will be kind of having roots in three places: Cape Town, Bali, Amsterdam. So what I do love about travel is just getting to see different cultures and experience different places and enjoy the food and the music and the weather.
Oh, I absolutely relate to that. My word for 2024 is freedom. And, it incorporates so many aspects of my life, but one of them definitely is to spend a month in Bali this year and to be able to pick up and move and work from all around the world because it's just something that I find is like it's part of my heart's yearning. I totally agree. I think setting roots, having that foundation is really supportive and it's really important. But I also love the freedom of being able to get up and experience this one beautiful life that we all get. Tell me, what does an average day look like for you? Because again, I don't think this is like the average day for most people.
Yeah, I would say the average day for me involves a lot of movement. So I love going to the gym. Exercise of any kind is super important to me. So I usually go to the gym more towards the morning, and it might be the rock climbing gym. I do a lot of bouldering. It might be a paddle court, something I've picked up recently, or just the gym and lifting weights. So I love movement. Coffee, planning out some kind of content, whether it's a podcast episode or reaching out to someone or making kind of social media content, and then coaching calls with my clients. And so those are interspersed throughout the week and random times because I have clients from all over the world. And sometimes I have to have a call at 8 in the morning, and sometimes I have a call at 9 in the evening, and sometimes it's in the middle of the day. So those are kind of sprinkled throughout my week. And I take them when I need to. And yeah, my days are very simple: exercise, meditation in the morning, working with my clients. Yeah, I think that's it. I'm a very
I
simple
love
person in
that.
some ways.
I
Yeah.
love that. And I imagine that simplicity is probably part of your recovery, which we'll talk about more in a moment. Now, Jeremy, I've asked you to bring in a photo today. Now, this photo is from a time in your life where you are hiding behind a smile. So you were presenting one version of yourself to the outside world, but the reality was you were struggling on the inside. Could you please describe for our audience what does the photo look like and what was going on for you at that time in your life?
Yeah. So the photo is with me and a friend, and it was when I was in college. A lot of my addiction was around my college years. Well, just to give a sense of the photo, this is me and a friend, and I'm holding a beer, and we're on a houseboat. And in Davis, California, there was this big party weekend called Houseboat Weekend, where everyone would kind of go to this lake, and there would be hundreds of houseboats, and everyone would drink. I think it was one of the like Labor Day weekends. And essentially, for me, it was in college, there was a lot of escapism. I was getting blackout drunk all the time, every weekend. Um, there was a lot of porn use and escapism through kind of pornographic imagery. Um, Also, kind of sex addiction as well, like sleeping around, very promiscuous. And I presented this front of being very happy, very social. I learned how to keep my feelings hidden. And so everyone thought I was this, happy, easygoing, very social person. But the truth is, I was very isolated. I didn't know how to be vulnerable. I didn't know how to express feelings. And I was experiencing a lot of loneliness, I would say. It's like feeling of being an outsider, the feeling of not fitting in, dealing with also the addictions to alcohol, to porn. But these were things that I always kept hidden. I've told this many times on my own podcast, but even after I broke free from porn addiction, to the time that I could talk to somebody about the fact that I even watched porn, it took me 6 years. So it took me a
Wow.
long time. Even after I was completely free from porn, it was another 6 years before I could actually even open up to another human being about the fact that I had ever even watched it. And so for me, there was so much shame around things I was feeling, shame around my porn use, shame around my loneliness, shame around my insecurities, and the fact that I was presenting this confident front, but really wasn't feeling that confident. So there's so much going on, and I think a lot of people can. Yeah, I don't think my story is very unique. I think so many men, particularly, we don't know how to be vulnerable, and we hide a lot behind a facade, whether it's behind the smile or behind, kind of a I'm an accomplished, successful businessman type of persona. We hide a lot of our feelings.
And this reluctance to come forward to talk about your experience or share your story, was that associated to the stigma, do you think, that comes with porn addiction? Because for me, I feel like it's probably one of the more stigmatized addictions out there.
Yeah, it's one of the more stigmatized. It's one of the less well understood ones. There's so much shame around. It's very interesting that sexual shame is one of the strongest sources of shame for us. And so any kind of addiction around sex or sexuality, it kind of brings up this feeling of, oh, I'm a pervert, I'm a monster. I'm not a religious person, but I do find it very interesting that, like, in the Bible, like on page 2 or whatever, it's like the first thing that Adam and Eve did after they ate the apple of wisdom or whatever is they covered up their genitals, right? It's like there's that shame around our sexuality that goes so deep. And it's one thing to admit, like, okay, I'm a former alcoholic, I'm a former drug user, but when you admit, hey, I'm a former sex addict or I'm a former porn addict, there's this feeling like, oh, people will not trust me. People will run away. People will think I'm a monster. So I think at the time, it wasn't a conscious, like, oh, this is a stigmatized addiction and therefore I can't open up about it. It was just so much internalized shame that, this real feeling of I'm unique, I'm broken. This is, a dirty part of who I am, and I can't let people see it.
Tell me, when did porn first become a feature in your life? How old were you?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to actually know exactly when, but I remember, it's like the first kind of things that I was getting introduced to were very innocuous and innocent, really. It was like the lingerie catalogs that would come in the mail, like the Macy's catalog or the Victoria's Secret catalog, and natural curiosity of sexual interest as a young boy. I'd kind of start looking at those. Comic book characters were also kind of very enticing to me. They're very, like, attractive and usually wearing, very tight fitting clothing. And so it was very early, maybe 7, 8, 9 years old, that I started kind of engaging in that way. And then, slowly over time, like downloading photos on the internet. This was back when you would
Oh my God.
you would download,
Yes.
yeah, and it would literally, like,
You'd hear the
come
modem
piece by
running. Yeah.
piece. Yeah, yeah, you hear that AOL dial-up sound.
Yeah. We're of a similar vintage.
Yeah. And you had to, like, download a photo without even knowing what it was. And then it was just like, it would slowly, over 10 minutes, you would get a photo, right? Um, and that evolved, and it slowly, internet started getting faster. And by the time I was in college, it was, tube sites and high-speed internet porn. And it got to the point where, I was watching it every day in college. And by the end of my time in college, when I was a senior, it was every night for at least an hour. Sometimes it would be kind of a longer session, 2 hours. It could go longer. Sometimes if I was really hungover, like on a weekend and just laying in bed, and I could watch it for hours and hours, just multiple times. And so it's one of these things that I've talked about. It's like, if you've ever had the experience of gaining weight slowly over a long period of time, you don't really notice it because you see yourself every day in the mirror, you don't notice the change. But if you look, from 1 year to the next year, you can see the big change. And it's the same with porn over a whole lifetime. It's like you don't really notice how it's growing because it's just a part of your daily routine. And for so many men, it's a part of their nightly routine or daily routine since they're 8, 9, 10 years old. And so we don't even know what it's like that life could be without this thing. So it just kind of slowly creeps into who you are.
Can you describe for me, like, what are the negative impacts of that then? Because, what someone might think that, watching an hour of porn of an evening, it's not hurting anyone. It's not that harmful. Like, what are the actual impacts psychologically,
Yeah.
emotionally, spiritually?
Yeah. Well, okay. So first we can kind of call out and maybe put to the side the whole conversation that we can and should have at some point around the connection between the porn industry and sex trafficking, between the porn industry and the mistreatment of sex workers or actresses or actors, because that is a whole conversation. Like the topic of, well, it's not harming anyone. It's just untrue. There's a lot of people being harmed by the porn industry. There's a lot of overlap between sex trafficking and the porn industry that you just don't know. When you log on to a porn website, you don't know if what you're watching is an actress who really wants to be there versus someone who is being sex trafficked. So there's that whole conversation that can and should be had. I personally don't have anything wrong with the idea of porn, the kind of just as an idea of watching someone have sex on a screen. To me, I'm not a religious person in that sense where I think, oh, this is a sin. So for me, a lot of the consequences are more about how it impacts you as a person. And there's so many interesting ways. And one of the difficulties with porn addiction is a lot of the consequences are subtle and downstream, meaning that, when you're an alcoholic, you feel the hangover the next morning. If you're a drug addict, you notice those consequences right away, and this is because of that drug I just took. This is because of that substance I just ingested. With porn, it's like stuff that builds into your life over years, where it's changing your relationship to other people. You are starting to objectify people more, starting to objectify yourself. It's changing your kind of your self-confidence. You might be comparing yourself to the people you're seeing. It's giving you unrealistic expectations of what other people's bodies should look like. I mean, just imagine if you're a 10-year-old boy and you watch porn for an hour a night, every night for the next 10 years. And every time you log on, you're seeing 18-year-old girls with perfect bodies and makeup and breast implants. You're starting to have these expectations of, this is what my partner should look like. And not just of what their body should look like, it's kind of what they're performing as well. Because modern hardcore internet porn it's a fantasy. It's not real intimacy. And so, this might get a little graphic for people, but, anal, choking, deep throating, slapping, name calling, all of this stuff that is getting highlighted in modern day pornography because it's the most exciting, it's the most titillating. This is what people are starting to expect. And especially young boys and young girls who are watching this, they're learning that this is what, people want. This is what girls want. And so, another thing I like to highlight, in porn, you never see a girl saying no to sex. You never see a girl saying, hey, I'm not in the mood, right? So what's that doing? It's giving guys the message that, oh, girls are always in the mood. If I whip out my dick, a girl's always going to want, to get on it or whatever. It's also giving that message to young girls that they're not allowed to say no. Because 10-year-old girls are watching this as well. And so they're learning like, oh, this is how I'm supposed to act. When a guy approaches me and makes a sexual advance, this is what I'm supposed to do, right? And so all the ways it's kind of informing our beliefs around intimacy. I also mentioned the objectification part. There's these really interesting studies that show the regions of the brain that are activated when we're watching porn are the regions that are associated with viewing objects not the regions of the brain associated with viewing people. So there are certain brain regions that
Wow.
we, have activated when we're talking to a person, and we're kind of, empathy, the mirror neurons, all this stuff is going on. And there's certain regions of our brain that are activated when we're viewing objects. We view a stapler, we view a table. When people are watching porn, those are the regions that are activated. And so not even on a kind of metaphysical or theoretical level are we objectifying people, but on an actual neurological level, porn is causing us to objectify people. So these are kind of some of the theoretical things. But in my own experience, the stuff that I was noticing was a lot of the ways that I was getting hooked on novelty in my sexual life. Because when you're addicted to porn, every night you're looking for a new video, you're looking for a new face, a new position, a new scene. And what that's doing is you're getting hooked on this experience of wanting something new. And it's making it very hard to actually enjoy what's right in front of you and really be grateful or deepen your appreciation for the person that you're with. And so I noticed just the ways it was affecting my relationships as well.
That was going to be my next question. How does it impact intimate relationships? Because I'm sure there are many couples out there who probably use porn as a tool in the bedroom, and that's totally, each to
Yeah.
their own. There are other people who don't. Can you talk to me about if people are doing it separately, and this isn't just men, it could be women as well, separately, not with their partner, what are the impacts that then has on their actual physical relationship and their intimacy
Yeah.
overall?
Yeah. So first, I'll just say that everyone's different, and I don't want to make a blanket statement and say nobody should watch porn. If somebody's out there and is saying, "Hey, porn is really helpful for me in my relationship," go for it. It's to each their own.
Just as we say, not everyone has to give up drinking. If you don't have a problem, then
Exactly.
it's probably fine. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. That being said, most men, it is not helpful for them. It's very rare to find. And the reason I say that the experience of porn is different for men and women. Women can get addicted, and women reach out to me all the time telling me about their addiction to porn and how it's influencing them and how they don't like what they're watching. And so definitely women can get addicted and it can be problematic for women. But it's also different. And there are some studies showing that for some women in relationships, the more porn that they watch, it actually helps them open up their sexuality and they feel more sexually interested in their partner. So that can be, one benefit is if a woman feels like, oh, this is making me feel more interested in being with my partner, the more porn I watch. And there might be reasons behind that. What the studies show for men is that the more porn that they watch, the less interested they are in their partner, the more isolated they become from their partner, the more judgmental they become of their partner's bodies. They're comparing their partner to the porn stars that they're watching and they're feeling less satisfied. So there's all these ways that it can impact that. There's also, a lot of times porn viewing comes with lying and hiding, hiding the behavior, which can cause a lot of problems in the relationship as well. It's a very thin line to use it in a healthy way. And I think most people are served by cutting it out altogether. But it can just really cause, there's also betrayal. Like for some women, if a man watches porn, then it feels like they're cheating on them. And that can cause a lot of problems as well.
What then defines an addict when it comes to porn? Because people
Yeah.
often ask me, what makes you an alcoholic? The same thing could be asked with this question. What makes somebody an avid porn user versus a porn addict, if there is such a difference?
Yeah. This is a great question. I'm happy we're talking about it. Addiction is a spectrum, and it's not like okay, once you've reached this threshold, now you're an addict. And just below that threshold, that's okay. It's similar to alcohol. It's like there's no real hard and fast line of like, oh, well, 3 drinks, now you're an alcoholic. But 2.75 drinks, that's fine, right? It's kind of like you can either embrace addiction as being this very open-ended spectrum term, or just get rid of the term addiction altogether and ask the question, is this causing problems in my life? Is this habit of mine having consequences that are harming me or holding me back in some way? That's the better question, because for some people, it's ruining their life. They're doing illegal things. They're ending up losing their job, going to jail, getting involved in very risky behaviors. It can be extreme on that end. For a lot of people that are in the middle, it might not be destroying their life altogether, but it's holding them back from a life that they really love. It's holding them back from real intimacy, real connection. It's holding them back from a feeling of self-worth and integrity. It could be holding them back just from their career goals, the time and energy. A lot of the people that come to me, they just say how much time and energy they waste on it. That alone can be so damaging. Hours and hours. It's just, if I put all that time into learning a new skill, working on my business, working on a hobby. So all the kind of minor ways that it can really just be this like empty calories that it's like we don't even need. And not only that, it's quite toxic as well. So I would say, if you're out there listening, like, am I an addict or am I not? Just let go of the term and say, is this causing harm in my life? And would I be better off without it?
I love that. It's simplified and it can be used across such a wide range of different vices. It doesn't really matter what it is, hey?
Exactly. And that's the thing. It's like for all addictions, just to ask yourself, like, okay, I don't have to say, am I a sugar addict or am I a Netflix addict? It's like just look holistically and saying, okay, this behavior of mine is bringing some benefits. It's helping me relax at the end of the day. But are the consequences outweighing the benefits here?
Such a simple tool to apply to any given circumstance. So, Jeremy, I'd love to talk a little bit more about your recovery from porn addiction. And when we were emailing back and forth, I asked you, well, what's your sobriety date, or what's the date that you gave up? And you said, it's a bit of a complicated answer. Would you mind sharing that for the audience? Because I think it's really interesting to hear that this isn't necessarily a linear experience.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you asked the question, when is my sobriety date? And I had to think, and I was like, well, I don't really know. Because for one, I don't keep track of it. I know some people are like, okay, this is my date, 10 years sober, and this is the date. And I haven't touched a drop of alcohol since. And for me with porn, it's much more complicated. I will say, I think it was May 17th, 2011. It was on my 25th birthday. I was in India, and I could go into this story, but essentially it was actually very easy to remember, because it was on my birthday that I had this experience of kind of waking up in a pool of my own sweat after like a porn binge, and just thinking like, what am I doing with my life? And that was the start of maybe 4 or 5, it might have been 6 years where I didn't look at porn a single time. And that was the start of my recovery journey. And so in some ways, May 17th, 2011 is when this all really started for me.
And at that time, did you get any support there, or was it just cold turkey? I'm doing this on my own. How did you manage that?
Yeah.
For somebody listening that's maybe contemplating it, like, what did that look like?
I went the hard route of, again, because I mentioned even after I broke free, it took me 6 years to open up about it. And so I did it on my own, and I don't recommend anyone doing that. I was very fortunate, have kind of the good karma, some people might say, of just like being in the right place at the right time with the right interests. I was in India. I was getting interested in Buddhist philosophy and meditation, and I was really kind of motivated. I had this, 3 months in India where I got to go on these silent retreats and explore my mind. And that was such a launching pad for me that enabled me to do this work on my own. And I became so passionate about meditation and Buddhist philosophy that on my own, I was able to do it. But I would not recommend that route for anyone. Learning how to be vulnerable. If I had learned how to be vulnerable sooner, I could have healed so much quicker and easier and gotten support that I needed earlier on. So to not try to do it on your own, it can be done. It's hard, and I wouldn't recommend it. So for me, it was on my own. It was a lot of meditation, a lot of going on retreats, understanding my mind. And we can talk later about the method that I use to break free, like what I see as really important in recovery. But just to get back to this question of my sobriety date, over the past, 5-6 years, there's been a handful of times where I've acted out with porn. And especially with porn where there's a lot of gray areas, some is, it's obvious. Okay, I'm on a porn website. Some is, what we might call edging behavior, where it's a little bit of a gray area, like, oh, I'm clicking on this YouTube link because I'm kind of seeing this person who looks very attractive, and I'm kind of fantasizing a little bit about that. So it's a hard line for some. And I know some people have two dates. They have a date for porn sobriety and a date for edging sobriety. Like, when was the last time I used something in a pornographic way, even if it's not really porn per se. So for me, I'm honest about the fact that maybe once a year I'll kind of slip up and I'll be in a bad spot and I'll act out with porn. And I think I really try to emphasize that it's not the end of the world. It's okay if you slip up. That the more important thing is how quickly you can get back on track. Because I see so many people, if you're too focused on your date and the streak, then the moment you relapse or have a slip up, it's like, well, I have to start at 0 now. Okay, well, I might as well just give up completely. I don't want to be on day 1. And what I like to tell people is your total time free from your substance is more important than the streak. If you have 7 years clean from porn, and then you have one day where you slip up and then you get back on track the next day, it's not that those 7 years don't mean anything. It's not like your day 1 of sobriety. I mean, it might be day 1 of sobriety, but it's not day 1 of recovery. It's like recovery is all the inner work that we're doing to break free from addiction and to cultivate a deeper, richer life that we feel good about. So that's why, for me, it's like, if you're out there, find what works for you. For some people, being really strict with that date and they want to hold on to that, it's great. And if you slip up, just get back on track and don't worry too much,
I love that, because you don't lose all of the knowledge that you've gained over the period of recovery, do you? Like, that doesn't go away. And so knowing that you can get back straight away, like the very next day, you can start again rather than falling into a spiral. I would love to know, in those moments of slipping, does the shame come back, or have you sort of superseded that?
It's a fascinating question. So I talk about shame is such a huge topic in recovery, and particularly porn and sex addiction, right? So we talked about why it's a bit more shameful. And I think one of the things I bring up a lot is it's important to understand that shame is actually healthy. Like, we need healthy shame. We don't want to let go of shame completely. We do want to let go of toxic shame. Toxic shame is that feeling of, I'm a bad person, I'm broken, I can't be loved. That's toxic shame. Healthy shame, on the contrary, is this feeling of, hey, that thing I did was unskillful. That thing I did was not in alignment with my values. And I wish I hadn't done it, and I want to do better. That's healthy shame, and we need healthy shame. There's one of my favorite teachings in Buddhism. There's these two mental qualities, hiri and ottappa. They're called the two guardians of the world. And they're the only two mental qualities that are both wholesome, like they're skillful, they're good mental qualities, but they're unpleasant to experience. They're the only two. Every other wholesome mental quality is pleasant, like love, compassion, patience, perseverance. These all feel good. But moral shame and moral dread are the two wholesome mental qualities that are unpleasant to experience. And they keep us from doing bad things in the world. They protect us from causing harm by reminding us that, hey, this doesn't feel good. So I just want to say that like, shame is important. And so when I act out, when I slip up, there is some of that shame, and more it's healthy shame. It's like, oh, this is not how I want to act. This is not how I want to show up in the world. And more, it's not slipping into toxic shame. That's a big part of healing from porn addiction, is letting go of toxic shame and recognizing, hey, so I watched porn. I'm not a horrible person. If you're watching this and you look at porn and you're dealing with porn addiction and trying to recover it, the most important thing I can tell you right now is you are not a bad person for watching porn. Like, that is the most important message for people to hear, because so many people feel like a horrible person when they do it.
And whether that's porn addiction, alcohol addiction, drug addiction, what I always say is I was taught very early on in my recovery, I'm not a bad person trying to be good. I'm a sick person trying to get well. So
Yeah.
just letting go of that idea that we're bad, that we're inherently bad is so, so vital to recovery.
Yeah.
Jeremy, let's talk about the recovery method then. I know that meditation and mindfulness has been a huge part of your own journey, but how do you help guide people through porn addiction recovery in the work that you do today?
Yeah, for me, one of the most important things was mindfulness, and particularly, this flavor of mindfulness that comes from Buddhist philosophy and kind of ancient wisdom. Part of mindfulness is just being aware of what's happening in your life, because a lot of addiction is unconscious behavior. We're not even aware of reaching out for the substance or logging onto the porn website. It just happens and we find ourselves in the midst of it, because a lot of it is these conditioned habit patterns. A big turning point for me was learning about the neuroscience of addiction and the neuroscience of craving, of lust, what was going on a neurological level. And a lot of these are just conditioned habits that we've built into our life over years or decades. With addiction, you have to be able to see these moments as they're arising, because part of the problem is when your brain is hijacked, when you're hooked by this feeling of acting out, a lot of the time it's too late. When you're already pouring the drink, when you've already taken the first sip, it's too late. When you're already on a porn website, let's say you've been clean for 30 days and then you find yourself on Pornhub, it's very hard at that point to de-escalate and back off. And so we have to get much better about noticing these moments, before they've gone too far, so that we can take appropriate action while it's still building up. I love this metaphor of like a cartoon snowball at the top of a hill. You start rolling the snowball down the hill, and by the time it gets to the bottom of the hill, it's this huge snow boulder, right? If you can catch it when it's at the top of the hill, then you can work with it. So that's really important, is doing that. And what meditation is, it's training the mind and cultivating neural pathways and cultivating mental qualities that are helpful and wholesome. And uncultivating or de-strengthening, we would say in neurological terms, de-strengthening the neural pathways that are leading to unskillful behavior. So if we're experiencing lust or craving, that's a neural pathway that we've strengthened over years. And through mindfulness, we can actually notice like, oh, lust is arising right now. Can I instead cultivate some curiosity? Can I instead cultivate some compassion? And can I start to lean in the right direction? There's this famous parable about the Native American grandfather talking to his granddaughter by the fire. And he says, have you heard the story of the two wolves?
No.
Oh, it's a great story. So there's this Native American grandfather sitting by the fire talking to his granddaughter. And he says, inside of you, there is a great battle going on between two wolves. And one wolf represents everything good. It represents love and peace and harmony and compassion and patience. And the other wolf represents everything evil, greed and hatred and war and enmity and all these horrible things. And this battle is going on inside of you, and it's going on inside of each and every one of us. And the granddaughter looks up to the grandfather and said, well, which wolf was going to win? And he says, the one you feed. And it's like, it's not this fairy tale ending. It's like, oh, the good wolf always wins. It doesn't. In some cases, the bad wolf wins. And it's about, what are we feeding, right? Are we feeding like craving and lust and, this hunger? Are we feeding anger and bitterness and jealousy? or are we feeding, these wholesome qualities? And this all works because of neuroplasticity. And so, for me, a big part of recovery is training the mind, being more aware of what's going on and starting to train the mind in these wholesome directions. On top of that, another component of Buddhist philosophy, and it's not just Buddhism doesn't lay claim to this, it's everywhere, but self-compassion, learning how to be compassionate towards yourself. So those are some key things that I start to work on with my clients, and things that were really important for me.
Oh, Jeremy, thank you so much for sharing that beautiful story and for sharing those pieces of wisdom and advice. I can't underestimate or can't stress how much mindfulness has played a part in my own recovery journey. So thank you so much for sharing that. There is one final question that I have for you today, and it's a question that I love to finish on with all of my guests who join me here on Behind the Smile. That question is, Jeremy, what are your 3 non-negotiables in your life today that allow you to live happy, joyous, and free?
The first 2 that are coming to me. So one is, you might call it fitness, you might call it exercise, health, but really taking care of the foundation. I used to be kind of saying that, okay, meditation is the most important thing, and you've got to control your mind and train your mind, understand your mind. And over time, it's really shifted. I really think that one of the most important things is taking care of your body. It has such a
Mm,
huge impact on recovery and mental health and well-being, that to me, like, movement and physical health and fitness and nutrition and sleep are the foundations that you build that recovery off of. You can recover while you're not practicing any of those things, but it's just so challenging, you know. Um,
mm.
and not only that, fitness and movement and exercise, it's what brings me joy. Also, I love playing sports and going rock climbing. So it's not just like, okay, this is what keeps me healthy. It's also what brings me happiness and joy. So that's one, is kind of fitness. The second I would say is community and people. I am introverted. I'm a very introverted person. It was just New Year's Eve, and I went to bed at 11 p.m. because I don't like staying out till 2 in the morning. And
Yes, I was
um,
in bed at 9:30. Go us.
yeah, yeah. Um, and so I'm introverted, but I also recognize that, we need people, and it's part of what makes life worth living is community, and the people we surround ourselves with, and the people that support us, and the people that we support. Having close friends, people you can really open up to and be vulnerable with, and laugh together. There's almost no substitute for that. So fitness, people, community. And then I guess, like some form of, and this gets back to the meditation, but really, you might call it self-awareness, you might call it self-compassion, you might call it knowing yourself, or mindfulness, but just some aspect of make it. So there's this samurai poem, I think, that something like, I make my mind my best friend. And so I guess a
Oh, I love
non-negotiable is
that.
like having a good relationship with yourself, like your self-talk, how you treat yourself. That you have to have that. If you can have everything in the world. You could have six-pack abs and $1 billion and the best friends in the world and living in the most beautiful place. But if your inner critic is the one driving the show, if you are beating yourself up, you're going to have a miserable life. And so part of this work of
Absolutely.
recovery is like learning how to be your own best friend, learning how to love yourself and care for yourself. And it doesn't mean that you're like a cocky asshole that thinks you're the shit, right? It's sometimes you have to call yourself out in your bullshit and say, hey buddy, I know you can do better than that. And sometimes it's self-compassion and saying it's okay, like you're going to be okay, and I care for the fact that you're suffering right now, but just being your own best friend.
That's beautiful, and just nurturing that connection with self. But more than anything, you're so right. It's like perception is projection, right? So you can have all those things on the outside, but if the conditioning of your internal world isn't being looked after, then you're not going to feel good. And that, at the end of the day, like that inner peace, that inner contentment, all starts from the inside out. a beautiful note to end on, Jeremy. Now, if people want to track you down, find out more about you, where can they go?
I would say my podcast is probably the best one, and so that is Unhooked. You can find it on Spotify, Apple, anywhere you get your podcasts, and it's for people with all kinds of addictions. It's focused on porn addiction, but as we all know, addiction is addiction, and recovery is recovery, and it's all related. It's all the same kind of stuff going on the inside. So it's really quite an open podcast for men and women and people dealing with all kinds of issues. Instagram is also good. Jeremy Lipkowitz on Instagram. I sometimes post on there quotes and motivational things. And those are the two places I would recommend going to check out.
Brilliant. I'll make sure I pop both of those in the episode show notes. Jeremy, we say here on Behind the Smile that when we recover loudly, no one need suffer in silence. So thank you so much for joining me here today and being a part of the show.
It's been a pleasure. Anytime.
Take care. Bye for now.
A big thank you for tuning in today. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so by clicking the subscribe button and leaving a review. Every review helps this podcast become more discoverable, meaning more people can hear these stories of strength and hope. Together, we will continue to remove the stigma around mental health, trauma, and addiction. Remember to reach out to those you care about, and I'll see you next time.